I still remember the freezing air of Alaska as the C-124 Globemaster lumbered through endless twilight, carrying me north toward Fort Glenn on Umnak Island. It was 1961, and the Cold War hung over us like the long night. We touched down on a makeshift airstrip cut out of tundra, mountains cloaked in snow and silence. My orders were clear but cryptic. I was assigned to Site 27, a top-secret underground missile silo that no one outside NORAD was supposed to know about. Climbing out into the frigid dusk, I felt the weight of the mission. Our job was to watch the skies and be ready to launch at a moment's notice. NORAD, the Joint U.S.-Canada Aerospace Defense Command, monitored man-made objects and warning of any missile attack on North America. In practice, that meant my crew and I had to make sure our missiles were always ready, even though, truthfully, we prayed we'd never use them. Guard dogs barked as I stepped toward the small building, where I was met by the base sergeant, a grizzled Air Force veteran with frostbitten cheeks. He introduced me to the rest of my crew, another lieutenant and 2 NCOs, and gave us a rough tour. The living quarters were Spartan, bunk beds bolted to concrete, a tiny mess hall, and a red phone labeled High Priority, Do Not Dial Without Authorization. Outside was the massive blast door of the silo itself, a sliding steel slab roughly 675 tons in weight, capable of withstanding 1,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. To put that in perspective, a typical house would be destroyed by only 5 psi. That enormous door felt like the jaw of some great beast, sealing off whatever lay beneath. The remoteness of this place was overwhelming. I was nearly 53 degrees north latitude, beyond the Aleutians, closer to the Soviet Far East than to Seattle. Dark clouds scudded overhead, then occasional auroras rippled the sky. During winter, we'd have weeks of night, and I'd wake in a cold sweat to the howling wind and complete darkness pressing against the bunker walls. NORAD's radar stations dotted Alaska and Canada, meant to spot any Soviet bombers or missiles coming over the pole. Our mission was simple in theory: deterrence, to convince the Soviets that any attack would be suicidal. In fact, one of my training manuals bluntly said it. If the Soviet Union were to initiate a preemptive strike on the US, we would still be able to retaliate with such force and devastation that it would be suicide for both countries. I didn't relish thinking about the devastation, but I understood. That was why we were here. Life settled into a routine faster than I expected. Each day was like the next, a slow march of drills and inspections. We worked in 2 crews of 4, 2 officers and 2 enlisted airmen who rotated on 4-day shifts. Our team was on alert for the first 24 hours of each shift and again the last 24 hours, with a rest day in between. During alert status, we were the only ones awake, sleeping only in quick power naps. We each had bunks for resting and a tiny kitchen for meals. Otherwise, there was boredom. The work was just like shift work anywhere else, checking gauges, sweeping floors, frying instant eggs at odd hours. We wrestled with the erratic diesel generators and checked the liquid fuel lines on the missile, making sure no one rustled or leaked. We walked the long corridors under half-light, surrounded by humming machines. Our whole job felt custodial, responsible for everything that went on at the missile site, as one crew commander put it.
We inspected the ICBM's maintenance panels every few hours and tested the inertial navigation system, running diagnostics on the radio circuit to Elmendorf or red phone lines to higher command. Every morning we held a brief stand-up report. I'd note that all systems were go, and that we'd kept the silo at the proper temperature and pressure. My fellow officers and I then spent hours poring over checklists and running drills in the Underground Launch Control Center, LCC. In that cramped room, we sat in front of consoles and watched blinking lights. 2 of us handled the computer console and communication gear, while 2 others watched gauges and tended to emergency gear. Our training drills could be tense. We'd simulate receiving a launch code, verify it against our safe-locked codes, and then carry through the launch procedure. Except, of course, we'd never actually turn the keys. Even in play drills, we had to follow protocol. There was no glamorous launch countdown for us, at least not really. When it came to an actual launch, each of the 2 officers on duty had to place a key in a console and simultaneously turn and hold it for 5 seconds. The keys were kept far apart, so one person physically couldn't turn both. We knew that if we ever heard the words Level 1 Alert and saw the console lights scream to life, the last step were those 2 keys. If we were told to go, we'd hold those keys until the missile fired. After that, well, they trained us that from that moment, there's no way to stop a launch. That idea was a cold comfort. Honestly, most of us never even thought about actually turning the keys. We treated it as a ritual rehearsal. I remember the weight of the keys in my hands felt like the world in miniature. If they ever left my fingers, everything would change in a flash. Between watches, we maintained a strict guard schedule. 2 men manned the silo entrance at all times. The massive 8-ton blast doors to the underground were closed or open as needed, but never unlocked for more than an hour. In all of my weeks there, I never once saw a civilian or outsider beyond the main checkpoint. Communication lines ran directly to Elmendorf Air Base, and we even had a secure landline to Stratcom. We knew the world outside was tense. 1961 was the year they began building the Berlin Wall. But out here, it felt suspended. It was just us, the missile, and our protocols. Our daily duties also involved constant security checks. Everything we did, even something as simple as walking 100 yards down a hallway, required check-in. We radioed every movement in the silo to maintain accountability. We logged every minor malfunction. If a gauge didn't read exactly right, we couldn't ignore it. That's how NORAD demanded it, as part of the Aerospace Warning Network. We could never be sure if a glitch was a genuine threat or just a sensor hiccup. Better to assume the former. My logbook is still full of entries like 0100 hours, verified silo pressure at 14.7 psi, within limits. Radar static spiked at 315 hours, source unknown. In truth, it was a life of constant checklists and occasional drills, not unlike being a nuclear janitor. We joked about it in our mess hall. A Titan II missile, standing 7 stories tall with a 9-megaton warhead that could obliterate 900 square miles, was our main tenant, and we were its babysitters. One Titan commander we met at training once shrugged and said, "It's best we project a credible threat. We needed to convince the Soviets that if they struck us, it would be mutual suicide." The phrase mutual assured destruction was new back then, but we practiced it daily. Still, we all went to bed each night hoping our base would never be tested.
For months, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Just routine alerts and blizzards outside. Then one frigid night in January, Strange things began. First, it was small details. The radio crackled with static, even though all external comms were silent at 0200 hours. Cold gusts rattled the beams above. My partner and I thought it was just a storm. But then the sensors in the hallways started tripping for no reason. Our motion detectors in a locked corridor went off twice, even though logs showed nobody entered from the bunk area. One of the generators hummed strangely, its indicator lights flickering like the lights in an old haunted house. After checks showed nothing physically wrong, we shrugged it off as electrical noise. And yet, things felt off. We began sharing anecdotes in whispered conversations. Once, I swear I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Beyond the thick 8-ton inner door at the end of the hallway, a sliver of blue light pulsed and vanished. Another night, the power dipped, and I heard what sounded like a faint voice calling my name through the base intercom, but no one was on the line. The static seemed almost audible. A radio test came back with a brief burst of music from an old Soviet folk song, not in any of our channels. The cumulative effect was chilling. We started compiling a list of anomalies in our mess hall, as if trying to laugh it off. Strange snaps. Routine checks of the silo's emergency shutters, the 3 internal blast doors in the tunnel, all showed them locked and sealed. Even though one of us had manually cycled them minutes earlier, the logs didn't match up. Whispers in the static. At least twice on off-duty watches, I heard what sounded like distant voices or coughing behind the crackle of my headset. When I called the comm station to relay the weird noise, they heard nothing at their end. Footprints in snow. Our perimeter guard once radioed that he found single footprints stamped in the fresh snow outside the blast door. Footprints that led straight up to the door and then stopped, as if whoever made them vanished into thin air. Security cameras, which were seldom used, showed no one there. Misbehaving lights. The fluorescent lamps in the corridors would sometimes flicker to life on their own in the dead of night, then go dark again after a few seconds. These incidents weren't easy to dismiss. None of us wanted to admit we were spooked, but one by one my crew nodded that we all felt uneasy. We began joking darkly. Maybe it's just the Aurora playing tricks, or ghost of the Cold War. But laughter died in our throats when, during one midday, all the lights in the silo suddenly cut out for nearly a minute. Backup power kicked in. Thankfully, we still had emergency lights, but our instruments had gone dark. When the lights popped back on, the clock on the wall read 42 seconds later than before. No one could explain that. It felt like we'd lost time, even though our radios were still on schedule. Worse, I found something scribbled on my notepad one morning that I swear I didn't write. In precise block letters was the phrase, "Do not open blast door B," underlined twice. My heart raced. I knew of no such warning on any official docs, and yet, after a moment of panicking, I realized my crewmates had never visited my bunk. It was as if the message had appeared there overnight. The room was empty, but cold, as if someone had stood next to my bed. I kept my find to myself and laid eyes on each of the others, and they all seemed uneasy. None said anything. We all understood the unspoken rule. No one touched door B. That timeline list sat pinned to the wall in the control center. After a while, all 4 of us had added our own notes to it. It read like a horror story. Weird signals, equipment misreadings, and an escalating dread. We had no proof of anything malicious, yet somewhere deep down, we knew something was very wrong in that silo.
No matter what, NORAD's orders were clear, and we followed them until that moment.
It happened on a calm February evening during my watch in the Launch Control Center. I was reviewing checklists for no good reason, just anxious, when the red warning light on Console 2 suddenly glowed. The control panel read, "Blast Door B, unauthorized opening." My blood ran cold. None of the other crew was at that panel. In seconds, klaxons clanged, and a booming voice crackled through the intercom. "All personnel to lock down immediately. Security breach at Blast Door B. Repeat, code intrusion." My heart hammered. We obeyed without question. The bunker's blast doors, there were 3 internal doors between the LCC and the silo, slammed shut and locked automatically. I grabbed my helmet and rushed to the hatch. The 2 security NCOs were already halfway up the tunnel toward Door B, weapons in hand. I followed, trying the emergency override panel. It was cold to the touch. Door A was sealed. We'd never opened the first compartment except for drills. We arrived to a sight I'll never forget. Door B, the second steel door, meant to isolate something, we didn't even know what, was cracked open a few inches as though forced. The hydraulic emergency lights behind were casting long, sickly yellow stripes on the wall. Outside the door, I saw scratch marks on the metal frame, like something had tried to claw its way in from the other side. One of the guards whispered, "It looks clawed, like talons gripped it." I felt a fierce urge to obey every last rule drilled into me, except one. I needed to know what was happening behind that door. The intercom blared again, telling us to stand by for EOD, explosive ordnance disposal teams. But none were coming down here for days, if at all. It was too remote. My mind raced. We have sealed it. Did we do the right thing? Against every instinct, I gave the order. I told the guard to secure that opening. The text on the panel said, "Fire hatch A and B," but we had no time for trifles. Carefully, I switched the control from auto to manual and hit the command to close Door B on the console. The door groaned and thudded against the ceiling lock. The shaking that happened next knocked me off my feet. An earthquake didn't occur. The ground was solid, but inside the concrete walls, it felt like the whole silo had jolted. A low rumble echoed up the shaft, and we all covered our ears. The air pressure reading spiked for a moment, then normalized. The consoles on the left flickered erratically, gauges spinning back and forth. As the light steadied, I reached for my radio. "Echo Baker to command," I stammered. "Blast Door B emergency resecured. Initiating lockdown procedures. Possible intrusion. All clear inside." But even as I spoke, I realized I didn't know if it was really all clear. We had violated a top-secret directive. Rumors later said those type of orders were codenamed Sarcophagus Protocol for unknown threats. Officially, though, nothing was said. I did my rounds to inspect the damage. The corridor beyond Door B was empty. Tools lay scattered, and a strange, oily residue smeared the floor where the door had slid shut. It looked like tar or blood. I couldn't tell in the dim light. On the console, some data had changed. The logs from 1 minute before the breach simply vanished. Whoever or whatever had been there had also wiped the evidence. I reported it up the chain. "Intruder report, unknown, lockdown complete." The higher-ups responded in terse, clipped messages. No mention of what was on the other side of that door. Only one new order arrived. Project folder sealed, no discussion. Resume normal operations. But normal was gone. We had broken the one rule we never touched.
Whatever was behind door B didn't come through to harm us physically, at least not that night. However, the heavy steels, at least, had held. The talon marks were our only clue of an actual creature, or something beyond our world. That night, I lay awake under my blanket listening to the wind and wondering if some awful thing had almost gotten loose. I kept expecting whispers or shadows, but after that, the bunker was eerily quiet.
The next days were a blur. We submitted reports, all classified and locked away, but got no answers. Slowly, we pieced together what we suspect. In hushed conversations, I realized that nothing we were told about our mission was ever complete truth. What I had to record here borders on unthinkable, but it's real to me. On the other side of door B, we found what I'll describe in general terms: a small antechamber with an odd control panel, unlike ours, covered in untranslated symbols. On one wall was a reinforced vault door with the inscription Goliath, contents reserved. No one had ever told us about a Goliath vault. Inside, they later said, they found an object in stasis, a metallic sphere inscribed with glyphs, humming faintly. It was clearly not of this earth. The scientists who came aboard were baffled, later calling it Exhibit X. When those scientists walked in, they were immediately subdued by a weird compulsion. I don't know if I was hypnotized or just under stress, but I remember their eyes going blank when they first saw it. One whispered, trembling, "Do not leave, do not speak," as if the object spoke through them. Then we practically had to drag him away before he could crawl into the vault. The telemetry gear registered something off the charts, beyond gamma or alpha radiation, something new. That's when the higher-ups installed an automatic auto-destruct code on the sphere's containment field. We were explicitly ordered to treat the sphere as top priority, but do not touch it. It was no missile. It was something else, something other. In the days that followed, secrecy sank in like concrete. Deeper commands came down. Don't mention this to anyone off-site. We realized our big steel missile was now secondary to something far stranger. I learned in fragments that the missile we were caring for was never loaded with a warhead at all, but rather a guardian cage for that sphere. The weapons check was just a cover. If the Soviets had invaded Alaska, our orders would have been to put that sphere into orbit by launching it, as if we were sending it away, not the warhead, an ICBM repurposed as an orbital containment launcher. I remember the look on the face of the new base commander when he finally told me more after hours of confrontation. In a low voice, he uttered an order I'll never forget. The whole world must never know what's in these silos. This is not about nuclear war, soldier. This is about defending against whatever is out there. He spelled out an unspoken policy. If any of us went rogue on door B again, we'd be court-martialed or worse. As if that admonition somehow confirmed my worst fears, I shivered. This thing was clearly not a weapon made by man. In those nights after the breach, I would sit alone by the hatch and try to listen. The sphere, we started calling it that in our own notes, emitted a low hum that I couldn't really hear, but I felt it in my bones. Sometimes it felt like my mind was whispering, telling me secrets. I won't pretend I understood. The psychologists later would probably call it stress hallucinations. But I heard a distant cadence sometimes that sounded like an alien lullaby. I caught security footage in my dreams. I was watching our world from orbit, seeing Earth roll away. If that was really me, I didn't belong with humans anymore.
At some point, I stopped watching the sphere. I focused on the betrayal. I had sworn an oath to follow orders, but this was beyond my training. I had joined to guard against man's weapons, not become warden of an alien relic. The burden was crushing. It dawned on me that the paranoia and strict isolation were because of this, not spies or saboteurs. We had been unwitting sentinels, standing watch over a secret that could undo humanity's understanding of the universe.
Eventually, they sent us home. My 4-day shifts ended, and I was transferred off-site under the guise of routine reassignment. In reality, I suspect they wanted us off that rock. Few witnesses in that command center. Back at Elmdorf, I signed non-disclosure papers, thicker than any previous paperwork. All records of Site 27 were classified above top secret. Officially, my promotion was held in abeyance, and I was told to retire quietly. The last thing they said to me, "We appreciate your service. You did what was necessary." I never asked what that meant. I've lived with the weight of that phrase ever since. The base at Umnak Island was sealed soon after, deactivated for budget reasons. If you drive by today, it looks abandoned, but I know better. I spent many nights after coming home staring at the sky, wondering if that sphere is still there, locked in its vault under the permafrost. They've told the public our nukes were dismantled, but I suspect the silo itself was never meant to fire a missile at all. For years I told no one about the breach or the sphere. In the military they label it classified, and we let it lie. I grew old, moved to the lower 48, grew a salt and pepper beard. Sometimes I looked at newspapers or heard whispers of UFO cover-ups and wondered if the exhibit ever became public. Likely not. This story never made it into blacked-out documents for mainstream press. Everyone carried on as if it was just another decommissioned silo. Now, decades later, I still lie awake remembering the feeling in that tunnel, the aloneness. I keep those old logs and scribbles in a locked box, 6-digit coded, ironically, just like the launch pad's fail-safe keypad we once tested. There were 17 million combinations with only 7 tries. .gov.us. I sometimes imagine calling up a historian or UFO researcher, but would they believe an old colonel haunted by dreams of a glowing orb? They'd think I'm senile. Maybe that's what the real order was, to make sure any story like mine would be discredited as fantasy. But I know the truth. Whatever was behind Blast Door B changes what we think of history. Maybe someday someone will reopen that silo, or the sphere will be found. Until then, all I have are these memories. If you've heard the faint radio chatter on clear nights, the weird stories of secret bases, believe this: I served at one. We were under orders to guard not just nuclear warheads, but something more terrifying. In the end, I can only wonder if that relic beyond Door B might still be silently watching the stars and us. This account is my confession and warning. The missile silo remains, its purpose hidden. I do not know if any human truly understands what we held. And sometimes in dreams, I can still hear it whisper.